Every morning, all over the country, millions of small, unholy boxes bugle this obnoxious demand for us to rise and shine. Who wants to wake up to a xylophone? Okay, who at Apple thought this was a good idea to wake up to a duck? Is that an alarm, or is that just a warning that, like, the mailman is here? Every day, the whistle blows, calling us to go, to learn, to do something. Sometimes it's rewarding, sometimes it's discouraging. It's important for us today to figure out how to discern those challenges and find practical principles to live by. Welcome to our Masterclass on School and Work.
You're welcome. All right, so you ever just go, I literally have done this a few times with my iPhone. I've just gone through and listened to every one of the tones that is offered, and I honestly wonder about the mental state of some of the people that came up with some of those ideas. I'm like, this is not a good idea, some of this stuff, but it's what we wake up to. So, hey, I want to welcome all of you to our Masterclass today. Like you just noted, we are looking at what it means to master work and school and just these simple demands that we have in our everyday life. And in doing that, here's my objective for the day. It's not for us to say, all right, then I'm going to be the best at what I do. I mean, that's awesome, but I think what's important is that we are balanced as we give our best to what we do. And that balance is always an important factor in discussing these things. And so right now, if you would like, you can open up our app. Our church has an app, all kinds of things inside that app as far as tools that you can use. But one of those is just a set of notes, which has all the points of the morning, has all the verses that are in there. Therefore, you have all of that working at your disposal. Now, we only have like 2 Sundays left in Masterclass, and then after that, we are starting the season of Advent. I love the season of Advent, and so starting this week in RC News, you will be able to download an Advent reader as a family. So if you want to do Advent as a family, great chance to do that. But today is all about our work. Now, I'm curious, how many of you would say you have had a really awful job at some point in your life? Just an awful job. All right, good number of you. Or maybe an awful teacher, an awful school, an awful boss. You had something. I know for me, it was shortly after Ellen and I were married. We moved to Spokane, and I ended up just getting the first job that I could get, which if you're from Spokane, I worked at a place called Yolks Pack and Save. And that was a terrible job, man. It was just, like I said, the first job I could get. I'm like, yes, I'll take it. And then once I got in there, I'm like, this stinks, man. Every part of it was discouraging and depressing, and I would go home discouraged. I'd go into work discouraged. I'd be like, tell Ellen, like, this is just the worst job in history, right? And then I studied jobs in history. And I'm like, man, in comparison, there has been some terrible jobs. In fact, did you know that back in our human heritage, there was the job known as the leech collector? And what they would do is they would pull up their pants and walk through bogs, and the leeches would collect on their legs, and then they would peel them off for medical purposes. I'm like, okay, Yolks Pack and Save isn't so bad after all, you know? Or there was the vomit catcher. This was a legit job, right? And your job during the Roman era was you would have this big bowl, and as people were eating and drinking and feasting, and they decided it was time to go ahead and make more room, you would come with the bowl, and you would catch. That's what you would do, and then they would go and they eat and drink more. So it was kind of like this weird, disgusting attic job, but not as bad as the guy that had the basement job. There was literally a person who was the stool collector of the king. And so when the king had to go ahead and go to the bathroom, they would fetch the stool. The king would do what the king would do. They would wipe the holy buttocks of the king. And then after that, they would sift through the remains to make sure the king was healthy. I'm like, in comparison, whatever your job was that was so bad, or mine, doesn't even compare to some of the bad jobs. I look at Mike Rowe and I'm like, you didn't have the dirtiest jobs deal yet, man. You got to go do some of those. Those are some dirty jobs. But we've all had jobs that are kind of tough. And what I want to do today is kind of step back a little bit and try to assess God's position on work and how we can see work in a different light. Because here's the thing I know about work. It consumes much of our lives. So for example, if you're a student, your job is school. That is your work. In fact, that's why they call it schoolwork and homework. It's work. And we would tell our kids that, like, right now, your job is to go to school. Or when they went to college, your job is to go to college and make that go well, right? Or some of you simply clock into some occupation. Either one of those categories, a full 1/3 of your life is spent in that context. And if you are a stay-at-home parent, you're like a 7-Eleven, man. 24/7, all the time, on the job. You are working, working, working. It is just a part of our framework. And so again, like I said, it's a major part of our lives. And I think because it's a major part, it's an opportunity or a context for us to understand then what God sees in relationship to this and how God can make much of himself through what we do, right? Because he is the master craftsman. He has a vision for our work, and our work can bring blessing to him. And so the place I want to start this morning, I think is really simple because I think it's a critical place to start. I always love to start with God or theology or the big idea. And the big idea to start with this morning is this: God, he digs work. God digs work. In fact, in Genesis chapter 2, second chapter of the first piece of literature in your Bible, talks about after God did the whole 7 days of creation, 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. It says, so the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. And on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all of his work. And then God blessed the seventh day, declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from the work of his creation. Now, I want you to notice right there, two critical words, right? God worked, and then God rested. These are characteristics we see in God himself, right? This is a part of his person. This is a part of his disposition, a part of the way he reveals himself to us. And so we want to understand that both work and rest, they emanate from God, right? We want to kind of take some ownership of that because it shows that both of these things are very good things. And there are things that we then want to model ourselves after. We want to, again, display these things. We want this to flow from our lives. Because when we read the Bible, we see that when God made man and God made woman, he made them in his image and likeness. And so if we have his image and we have his likeness, and we see that God worked and God rested, that says something to us about what is unique and indigenous to our purpose in this world. Because there's this reality is just as much as God digs work, God made us to dig work. It's actually what we're built for. In fact, I want to, again, take you through this first section of Genesis. It says, then God blessed them and said, this is the man and the woman. He said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. He says, reign. Then you go into chapter 2. It says, the Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it. And then God said, it's not good for the man to be alone, and so I will make him a helper who is just right for him. Now, I think this highlights a couple of things that are important, at least in my thinking. The first is this. I think that opening scene disrupts some of our preconceived notions about what the world was like in that early stage. See, I think sometimes the way we picture it is that the whole planet was just this perfect, pristine thing. It was all just sort of finished and done. And so you have this man, you have this woman, and they're just chilling, eating passion fruit and hanging out sunbathing. Like that's all they get to do all day. Right? It's all perfect. They're just playing with the animals and having fruit salad. And that was their efforts, their works, their things. But that's not what we see. We see all these words. What is it? Multiply, govern, reign, tend, watch, help. Those are working words, dude. Right? Those are working words. There was a sense in which there was effort, and there was investment, and there was doing. See, because I think the picture that is there is that God had established this realm of Eden, but then he was saying, I want you to expand those borders, right? I want you to bring innovation and creativity and taming. I want to see you kind of shape the world beyond Eden in unique and special ways. And at the same time, he says, and you need to kind of keep a watch on Eden. That's that idea of keep and protect or guard or tame. I mean, that is effort that is involved. And so God clearly, from the get-go, makes people and says, all right, in the making, you are supposed to be engaged in the doing of work. This leads me maybe to the second thing that I think is important, and that is this idea that work was intended before sin entered the world. Because I think sometimes we get this corrupted idea that says, no, work came because of what happened. No, work was always the expectation. I mean, again, if I just kind of looked at this principally, I see that God gave them environmental stewardship, an innovative commission, and a developmental mandate. Like, he's like, I want you to go and bring more to what you see. And that is your job. And I think that was their job because, again, this is God's gift to them. He's like, I'm a God who works. Even Jesus says it in the Gospel of John. He says, my Father since the beginning has been working, and so also I have been working. Like, both the Father and the Son, they love work. And so they gave us the gift of work. But like I said, I think there has been some misunderstandings at times where people go, you know what? No, work is the consequence of sin. It's like when God confronts the man and the woman, it's like he gives them this, you got to get a job speech now, right? Get out of my house, time to go adulting, you blew it, you know it all, go do something with your lives now. Like I think that's how people sometimes kind of see this. But that's not what happened in Eden's rebellion. It wasn't that work was created, but rather what we see is we see when work became work, right? There is that shift. Something did occur. In chapter 3 of Genesis, it says this. It says, to the man he said, since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch out a living from it. So here's the difference. When Eden was just blessing, the efforts of people succeeded, right? Everything was just working for you because everything was, like, in that sense, kind of blissful. There was no HR department. Every Friday was casual Friday because you had no clothes. I mean, it worked out perfect. You didn't need a cover sheet on your TPS report. It worked out all good. I mean, like, all this stuff was just solid. But then after their rebellion, there was the cursing of Eden. And with that, work became hard. Work became unpredictable, right? So sin didn't create work, but sin made work hard. That's the difference. And I think it made it hard in 3 different ways, right? First of all, it made it hard because you would have to do work with other people. And other people are hard. Because in some ways you're hard, right? I mean, you see the way the story unfolds. It goes from the man and the woman are on the same page, they're working in unison, they're getting things accomplished, to suddenly you see that the man and the woman are at odds with one another. And they're starting to argue, and they're bickering, and they're blaming, and that's going to make work hard. Then you get to the next chapter, chapter 4, and you see a brother and a brother. They're jealous, and they're fighting, and they're bickering in the context of their work. And you get a little further into chapter 4, and you see there's this guy named Lamech, and he and a stranger get into stuff. And so there's always tension among human beings. So part of what makes work hard is that we have to work with one another, and we, in and of ourselves, have a type of hardness in our lives that makes that effort difficult. That's the first thing. The second thing that makes work so hard is that the environment itself of this world is challenging. Nothing is ever easy. And God said it that way. He says, man, it's going to be thorns and thistles. It's going to be effort to try to cultivate and kind of control the environment you're in. And I think the third thing, and I kind of alluded it into the first, but the third thing is the fact that we are broken people. Right? God tells the man, because of all this, surely you're going to die. And so we have our own struggles. We have physical limitations, emotional hiccups, psychological challenges. Just we in and of ourselves are going to be problematic in the equation. So all of that then makes our work difficult. It makes it hard, right? Work will be work. And yet, according to the Bible, work is still good. And work is good because it finds its life in God. God is a working God. He calls us to work to reveal his character to the world. So with this, I think what we want to do is to begin to look at our work differently. And we want to deem our work as redeemed. Or maybe to put it different, we want to deem our work as redemptive. This idea of redemptive, redeemed, or redemption is the idea of claiming something back in like a new name. Claiming something back in such a way that the freedom is found in it and not the slavery of the thing, right? And so our calling, our opportunity, especially as those who are seeking to be like Jesus because we know life is better with him, as we seek to do that, then we need to look at our jobs differently. Whether it's school, work, at home parent, whatever it is, we need to look at it in this term of, man, how do I bring a life-enriching, God-honoring spirit to the whole matrix of my work? See, in a part we want to do this because I always go back to what is the storytelling arc of the Bible. It was creation, it was fall, and then immediately by chapter 12 of Genesis, it's God saying, we're going to recreate, we're going to bless the nations. And a lot of that blessing of the nations is done in the everyday fabric of life, in all the ways that we must interact with the world, bringing Jesus into the equation as we interact in that world. And much of the way that we interact is through our work. In fact, there was a small business owner who wrote this: work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. That's our friend Paul. And we go, well, Paul was an apostle. Right, he was an apostle that had a small business, and he wasn't paid to be an apostle. He made tents for a living. And so he could say with conviction, right, work for the Lord as you are working. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ, right? It's not your boss or your company or your school or your teacher. You're ultimately serving Christ. And so in our job, whether we love our job or we struggle with our job, we want to give 100% to our job. Or if we're a stay-at-home parent, we want to give 100% to that. Or a student, you're not doing it for the grades or for your teachers or for your parents. You're doing it for Christ. Even if you're a volunteer in some capacity, right? We should look and say, man, I'm not really giving my time, and they are to be appreciating of me for giving my time. No, we just go, man, this is an opportunity to work, and even though I'm doing it as a volunteer, I'm going to give my 100%, right? Because when we work, it's how we breathe life and flourishing and encouragement and blessing into our everyday context. Right? That's how we want to see it. We want to see these outcroppings in our life as mission fields, where we can make much of God in the process of doing these things. Because I'm convinced God cares about the context in which we operate, because it is a context where he can operate through us. I want to say that again. God cares about the context in which we operate, because that is a context in which he can work and operate through us. Because again, I go back to, we are made in the image of God, and in that image, we are then to go and reveal that image to others. And so I remember years ago, I came across this little article, and I couldn't even find the references, but I still had the printout of the article. It doesn't even have the author or anything like this. But it was this great picture of saying, hey, here's these different categories, how we are then bearing the image of God in our work environment, and how they all reveal God's story in seeking to rescue the world. And so in talking about vocational opportunity and how we should face it, this writer said, well, there's different categories, 6. Said, for example, some of our work is literally redemptive work. In other words, it's work that models and displays God's saving and reconciling actions. And so the writer here talks about things like, you know what? When humans participate in things like pastoring, for example, but also counseling or peacemaking, they're engaged in this idea of reconciliation. Same with writers and artists and producers, songwriters, poets, and actors who incorporate redemptive elements into their stories. Watch movies or television shows where it's constantly about the hero saving, about somebody being rescued, about bringing these positive qualities to the table. Many stories steal their stories from the Bible and from God, right? And these storytellers tell those redemptive stories. There's another listing, which is creative work, which is all about God's fashioning of the physical and human world. And so it talks about those who are craftspeople, interior designers, metalworkers, carpenters, builders, fashion designers, architects, novelists, urban planners. They're all displaying God's creativity. Just as God creates and called us to create, when we create, we're doing that. And whatever your context is, or you might be a software developer or a game developer, whatever, you're creating worlds. And that can be creative work. There's also providential work, work about provision for sustaining humans and creation. This could be public utility workers or public policy makers, shopkeepers, career counselors, shipbuilders, farmers, firemen, repairmen, painters, transport workers, IT specialists, entrepreneurs, bankers, mechanics, engineers, building inspectors, plumbers, welders, janitors, right? It's not like, oh, I just have this blue-collar job. No, you have provincial work. You're doing something that is helpful to keep human beings going. Maybe you're in the justice field. A judge, a lawyer, a paralegal, government regulator, legal secretary, city manager, prison warden or guard, policy researchers and advocates, diplomats, supervisors, administrators, law enforcement personnel. They're making sure that the idea of God's justice is being displayed in the world. That is noble and good and represents God to the world. Maybe instead of justice work, you're in compassionate work, comforting, healing, guiding, and shepherding people. So maybe you're a doctor, a nurse, paramedic, psychologist, therapist, social worker, pharmacist, community worker, nonprofit director, an EMT, a counselor, a welfare agent. All of these are things that bring compassion. Or maybe you're in the world of revelatory work, right? To enlighten with truth. That's scientists or educators, journalists, scholars, or writers. I mean, I remember when I saw this for the first time, it was like, man, yes, everybody really is an everyday missionary. Right? Whatever your field, whatever your work, you are able to bring qualities of God to the environment. And so this is why we want to own principally why our work matters. When somebody says, my job doesn't matter, every job matters. Every job matters because every job is a context that God can use as a context to show himself through you. Every job matters. And so this is why we want to be wise in our work. Right? In fact, this is why I love Solomon. I love Solomon because he just tries to help us get into the nuts and bolts of everyday stuff and give us nuggets of insight to do what we do well. And one of the things he loves to talk about is work. Right? Matter of fact, throughout Psalms and Ecclesiastes, he talks about diligent workers and lazy workers. He talks about honest workers and shady workers, sensible workers and greedy workers. And he does this so that we will be reliable in our work, and from that we'll have a reputation where then people go, well, what drives you? That's much of the heart. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 3, he says to his son, my child, never forget the things that I've taught you. Store my commands in your heart, and if you do this, you will live many years and your life will be satisfying. Never let loyalty and kindness leave you. Two critical words equally in tandem. He says, tie them around your neck as a reminder. Write them deep within your heart. Then you will find favor both with God and with people, and you will earn a good reputation. See, part of having a good reputation is how we earn favor with God and people. It's not really the earning, it's how we have it, it's how we display it. So he says, be loyal, be kind, take what I have to say to heart. And so Solomon then says a bunch of stuff about work and wisdom and things like that, right? And so I want us to look at how we can master work through wisdom, not just have skill or aptitude or be good at something, but how we can even have that intangible insight of wisdom as we do what we do. And so here's the first thing I think is so important. It's accept that work is oftentimes work, right? Accept that work is oftentimes work. I mean, here's why I say that. I was even having a conversation with some people recently, and they were saying, oh, man, I don't want to have a job, right? Kind of said it like that. I don't want to have a job. I want to do what I love and love what I do, right? Which would be awesome, right? It's like the kid that goes to his parents, like, Dad, Mom, it's all about the music. It's not about the money. And then you're like, no, it's all about the rent, dude. Like, honestly, like, you're not always gonna find that thing you love to do. It's not always gonna be that way. In fact, I'm gonna go a step further. Let's say you find the job that you love, right? And you love doing that job. That job will still be hard. It'll still be hard. I know people who are like, man, my job is the best job, and then they have really hard days. It's still work. Sometimes you are fighting and clawing your way through, even in the best of jobs. In fact, the only job I know of that is not a hard job is not having a job at all, and ultimately that's hard, right? Right? It is. It's only hard on you. In fact, this is what he says in Proverbs 13:4. Lazy people want much but get little. That eventually gets hard, right? But those who work hard, they prosper. Now some will say, bro, I'm not lazy. I'm just chasing my dream, right? And here's what I'll say. If you are chasing, then you're working hard. I actually am going to give you that. Like, there's a lot of hustle in the chase, man. I've known people, they're like, it's all about the music, and they chased hard, and they scrap out a living. I mean, they didn't become famous or anything else. You know, they're on the road a lot. They're doing a lot of things. You know, they're not making 6 figures a year, but they have a living, and they're doing what they love. They chase it all the time. They keep finding the next gig, and I go, that person's working hard, right? They're chasing the dream. But if your emphasis is more on dreaming than chasing, wishing and wanting and hoping, but you're not doing the chase, you might be a bit disappointed. Proverbs 12 says, a hard worker has plenty of food, but a person who chases fantasies has no sense. Right? So if you're chasing and not just dreaming, and you're working hard in the chase, you're fine. Do what you love what you do. I think that's great. But it still means that, hey, work is simply work. And we want to own that. It's never not going to be work. Even the best of gigs take effort. So with this, Solomon knows work is work. And so he's going to have some advice. The first thing is this. He's going to say, work smarter. Work smarter, right? It's easy to work harder. Just don't have a plan. Don't take ownership. Don't seek to grow. And it's going to be hard, right? Just keep doing what you're doing, be on autopilot, and over the course of time, it becomes emotionally and internally hard. I went through this early on as being a lead pastor. Like the first 5 years, I was like, hey, my job is just to preach the Bible, verse for verse, just do this. And after a number of years, I just started to feel drained and worn. It wasn't like the job was hard. I was just making it hard because I wasn't trying to be smarter. I was just like, I'm on autopilot doing the same thing week after week after week. And God's like, man, you need to get some vision. You need to get some drive. You need to think more creatively about how you teach. It was like this big confrontation. And then from that, I was like, yeah, that's true. Part of why this is so hard is I'm not being smart. It was just draining me inside. And so, man, we got to work smarter. In fact, I love this. Solomon says this in Ecclesiastes 10. Using a dull axe requires great strength, so sharpen the blade. Isn't that the best? He's like, hey, moron. Take it to the wheel, dude. This is why I love Solomon, right? He says, that's the value of wisdom. It helps you succeed. So here's my challenge to all of this and all of us here today. What is the blade you need to sharpen? Like in your world, you go like, man, I got a dull blade. I'm swinging like a mad person. And I said, sharpen it. And maybe in that, how can you sharpen it, right? I remember for me, when I went through that whole thing, and I was like, man, I'm just drained as a pastor. Yeah, I was living in Spokane, actually came over here to Woodinville, to the Barnes & Noble, and started grabbing books just on leadership and vision, and that just kind of rejuvenated me, like, oh, I could be doing more. I didn't realize, and so I started getting some smarts on that, right? Maybe that's it, or listen to a podcast, or read articles. Maybe it's getting a life coach. Maybe it's getting a new class. Maybe it's making a change from what you do. Not all change is bad. Sometimes you really need a change to reignite and do better. Maybe it's an awkward conversation with a colleague or a boss or whatever, but doing it in a way that's gracious and compassionate. I don't know what it is you can do to sharpen your blade, but sharpen your blade, right? That's what we want to do. There's no use to just keep hacking and hacking and hacking without some assessment, right? So stop hacking, start sharpening. That's a good piece of advice. The second thing, though, Solomon would say is work harder. Like, no, I thought it was work smarter, don't work harder. No, it's both. It's both, right? Listen, here's the thing. Smarter simply augments harder. But there is room to always want to increase our effectiveness. In fact, in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, previous chapter, he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead where you're going, there's neither working nor planning nor knowledge nor wisdom. I know that's a little morose at the end. That's a little discouraging. You're like, oh, well, that's great. But that's not his point. His point is, man, you get one shot to give your all in this life. So give your all. And not just for your company or your boss or your teacher or your parents or whatever motivators there are. We want to work harder and work smarter as a tribute to God and a way that we bless others. Because I think our work is a great way to exhibit the greatest commandment. If I'm going to really love God and love people, then I come to the table of life giving my all for God and my all for people. And work is a way we do that, right? Bringing our best, smarter and harder is a blessing. But the smarter and harder needs a third component that I think is really critical, and that is this: work chipper. It's the only ER word I can think of that's positive. But work chipper. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit saps a person's strength, right? Here's what I'm getting at here. In terms of the office, be a Jim, be a Pam, be an Aaron, right? Those characters are great. Don't be an Angela. She was terrible. Don't be a Stanley, right? You don't want to be any of those. Don't be a Creed. Creed was always kind of weird anyway. Now, Toby got picked on a lot. I think Toby got too picked on, right? But just you want to think in terms of man, I want to be positive. I want to be encouraging. I want to be uplifting, right? Because here's the thing, man. Nobody likes to work with Captain Whiny Pants. Nobody, right? It's not fun. Right? Matter of fact, one of the things I've tried to think through on this one is don't become work at work. Don't be work for people. Don't be work for your boss, right? You don't want to do any of those things. You want to be helpful, encouraging, have a great attitude. Be good medicine for the working world, right? That's what it means. Be good medicine. I think that's what's so helpful. And being good medicine means here's some things you don't want to be. Ultimately, you don't want to be that person. And there are some that person things that any of us can slip into. First of all, you don't want to be that lazy person, right? Because if you get the reputation of the lazy person, that is like the kiss of death in the work world, right? Where they go, man, that's a lazy student. It's a lazy employee. That's a lazy volunteer. You don't want that, right? Because again, it's going to undermine your reputation, and that is a tough thing to reclaim, right? There's another reason, though, I think this is so important, and that is this. When somebody is seen as lazy, they're seen literally as being more work than they're worth. In fact, Solomon said it this way: a lazy person is as bad as someone who destroys things, right? I mean, literally, you're like, give us the klutz over the lazy guy. Give us Gilligan. Right? Because that would be a lot better. Some people are like, who's Gilligan? Yeah, YouTube it. You'll figure it out. All right. So, dating myself here. All right. So, anybody on Phineas and Ferb? Okay. So, anyway. But you know what? Honestly, a lazy person, and here's why lazy people can be so destructive. When a person starts to be lazy in a job environment, they set the new bar. And that can contaminate over the course of time. Right? You get a person that's lazy, and pretty soon you get two people that are kind of lazy, and then three people, and then people are like, hey, just work at the pace of that guy. Right? And that's why it's destructive. And so we go, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that lazy person. I don't want to exhibit those things. So in terms of the office, again, don't be a Michael Scott, right? Because ultimately, he was in charge and lazy. And everybody knew it, and everybody mocked it. The second thing is this. Don't be that excuses person. The excuses person is the person that always has a reason for why something is late, why something got messed up, why something isn't going to work out, why something's going to be too hard. And they don't just say, yep, my fault, or yep, I'll get it done. It's always like, no, let me tell you why. Let me explain it to you, right? The excuses person is not really a blessing to the work world. In fact, when I worked at Office Club, now Office Depot, I think it is, but way back in the day, actually a job I really liked, and I worked with this guy. His name was Tom, right? And Tom was the guy that was just the excuses guy. And so every time there'd be something, he'd be like, oh, it's not my fault, it was this, or I can't do it now, or I won't be able to do it later, all this stuff. And it got so bad that my manager, whenever anybody else would have an excuse of some kind, he'd like, pulling a Tom, are you? He's all right, Tom, get back to work. And we're like, I'm Matt, right, but you're acting like Tom, right? You know it's bad when you're so known for your excuses that you become the euphemism for excuses, right? Like, so I guess what I'd say to all of us is let's not be a Tom, right? Because it's not a blessing. In fact, Solomon says this, the lazy person claims, there's a lion out there. If I go outside, I might be killed. That's just stupidness. It's like the lamest excuse. It's like saying, I can't go to work today because a plane could fall from the sky and land on me. Like, right, the odds of that are high, right? Same thing here. They're just coming up with something outlandish to have an excuse to not do their job well or timely or to take ownership of their failures. Just as problematic as the excuse person, don't be the know-it-all person. Ooh, the know-it-all person. Now, here's the deal. You might know it all, but don't sound like you know it all, right? Because nobody digs the know-it-all person. Even Solomon, the dude who actually knew it all, talks about the know-it-all. He says a lazy person considers themselves smarter than 7 wise counselors, right? And sometimes they really do, right? And there's a difference between being the smartest person in the room and thinking you're the smartest person in the room, right? Being the smartest person in the room, man, that's going to be clear. Everybody's like, that person, they get it. Thinking you're the smartest, everybody goes like, that person's just sort of full of themselves. They think they're smarter than everybody else. In fact, I remember again at Office Depot, I had a manager that was just like that, right? Thought he knew everything and understood everything and, didn't really always work super hard, but thought he knew everything and thought he should be like employee of the month every month until suddenly he got his pink slip and he was fired because we found out he didn't know much of anything. And so they let him go, right? What this means in the office speak is don't be a Dwight Schrute, all right? Just don't be Dwight. You'll do well. And then last, don't be that rat out others person, right? Don't be the one that rats out others. Now, I'm not talking about if you have to report something that's honestly serious, substantial, problematic, like that's totally fine, right? What this is more about is like, don't get sucked into the office politics of slander and gossip and talking about people and kind of ratting them out in a way that really isn't important. In fact, Solomon said, never slander a worker to their employer, and I would say, or other employees, or that person will curse you and you will pay for it, right? You don't want to do this whether you're a volunteer or whether you're working in a company or you're going to school. You just don't want to do that, right? Don't get ahead by trying to push others down, right? Because that's ultimately the heart of that whole thing. Rather, be known for what you bring, not what you take in the environment. That's the heart of the worker. Because here's the deal. When you read through Proverbs, God calls us to loyalty, thoroughness, competency, honesty, charity, reputation, all in the realm of what we do. And so when we go off tomorrow to whatever we do, it's an opportunity for those things. I love what Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 4. He says, make it your goal to live a quiet life, minding your own business and working with your hands, just as we instructed you before. Then people who are not believers will respect the way you live. See, again, all of this is just opportunity. It's context for us to be light in our world, to bring blessing to the nations, to fulfill God's recreative mandate. And just as much as I think work is a way we can do that, there's another element that I think is really critical that I want you to take note of, and that is that, the fulfilledness of rest is just as important as the fulfilledness of work. Therefore, we want to understand that God digs rest and made us to dig rest too. I take you back to the very beginning of our talk today. In the beginning, God created. Over 6 days, He made, He worked, and then on the 7th, He rested. That is also a model for us in our work. It's the pattern. In fact, in Exodus chapter 20, you find the 10 commandments. Inside the 10 commandments, you find the 4th commandment, the commandment that everybody forgets, all right? But it's a good commandment. He says, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. That was sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. It was that 24-hour period. That was their Sabbath in the Old Testament. He says, you have 6 days each week for your ordinary work. But on the seventh day, that is the Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. And on that day, no one in your household shall do any work. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. Now, I'm not saying you have to take Friday sundown to Saturday sundown as the window, right? There's reasons that I'd say that doesn't have to be the mandate any longer for us, but the wisdom and the thoughtfulness of saying, I value a break. And I make rest as important as work is critical. Because again, our job is to model. Our job is to model to the world a healthy blessedness, right? We are to model thriving. And if you're a workaholic, you're not going to thrive. As much as if you're not working and you're lazy and you're not working, there's other reasons you may not work that are totally healthy, but if it's for laziness reasons, you're not going to thrive. And so we want to just, again, own that there is value in our work and there is value in our rest if we hope to master our craft in life. In fact, I quote, kind of end here rather with a quote from Maya Angelou, who really is just a great quote. She said, every person needs to take one day away, a day in which one consciously separates the past from the future. Jobs, family, employers, and friends can exist one day without any one of us. And if our ego permits us to confess, they could exist eternally in our absence. Each person deserves a day away in which no problems are confronted and no solutions are searched for. Each of us needs to withdraw from the cares which will not withdraw from us. Rest. As much as work, we need to rest. Let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, thank you for this reminder that you have been working. Your Father's been working. We too are called to work, and yet you rested. Your Father rested, and we are to rest as well. May we find our rest in the windows of our weekly lives, but may we also find our rest in you. We thank you for your good grace and your love toward us in your awesome name. Amen.